Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie paper and ink, and here are a couple cards using elements from the Simon Says Stamp November 2018 card kit. Also combining this with last week's Color Throwdown challenge that I am behind on as usual, which seems to be the story of my life. Anywho, I trimmed down some ivory cardstock. I just cut it in half and then cut it in half again, so I had 2 panels. I decided I would make 2 cards because this is a fairly simple technique. I had kind of the whole idea, running around in the back of my head, so I kind of knew what I was going to do, how I was going to do it, etc. And I was like, well, I might as well just do 2 while I'm at it. So I used my anti-static powder tool first on both of these, and that just helps prevent the embossing powder from clinging to fingerprints or little static areas, anything like that, because you want the embossing powder to only cling to what you stamp. And I stamped the large thank you stamp from this set with Simon's clear embossing ink, and I'm using Simon's detail gold embossing powder. I wanted to stamp the sentiment first so that I could sort of stamp some of the leaves from these sets around it. So I did the gold embossing first for the sentiment. I thought that would just kind of play nicely with these colors because this color challenge was green, craft, and white. I used ivory cardstock instead of white just because that's what came in the kit. Plus, I kind of liked something not so stark white, but either or would work nicely. So while I had that embossing powder out, I also just used some of the green leaf cardstock and stamped one of the smaller sentiments, and the one that just says it is not enough. Stamped that a couple times and then heat embossed that with the same gold embossing powder and then set that aside. And then I used my anti-static powder tool again because I'm going to do more stamping with the clear embossing ink and more heat embossing. I grabbed a second little coffee filter because I like to use separate filters for separate colors of embossing powders because I don't want to mix my embossing powders. I don't want to contaminate them, especially my clear, my white, etc. Because those ones, especially the clear, it'll show up if you get, flecks of other colors, stuck in there. And then I'm just stamping leaves from the set. You can't really see it, so I sped this up because it just doesn't look like anything. But I just kind of stamped some of the different little leaf images around the sentiment with the clear ink, and then I'm heat embossing them with the clear embossing powder. So once I was kind of happy with how that was looking, I'm now going to use distress ink, just regular distress ink in peeled paint. And I'm going to sponge that over, and all of those leaves as well as the sentiment are going to resist that ink because they're glossy. And then they're gonna the leaves especially will appear as if kind of magic, which I always just love. And I purposely used different amounts of pressure when I was sponging on this color. So I get, lighter areas and darker areas. It doesn't need to be perfect. I wanted, a bit of that variation. I didn't want just a smooth, flat, solid color. I really like sometimes to have, the different shades of green or whatever color I'm using kind of show up. Plus, it's easier. So I just sponged the color on. I kept holding up the wafer die. I'm gonna die cut this with one of Simon's stitched rectangle wafer dies. So I just kind of kept using that as my guide as to where I was stamping everything because there was no point stamping or sponging perfectly, all around the edges because that's gonna get cut off. And then I pulled out the peeled paint distress oxide ink. You could use the dye ink for this, but I really like how the oxide ink kind of sits on top. So I wanted those leaves to kind of show up a little bit more. So I just stamped the leaves again with that oxide ink. And then I laid out both panels and sprayed it with water. I just pull the nozzle out of my distress sprayer and flick it against my finger. So I get a finer kind of splatter with that and then let it sit for a bit. Picked up the color with the paper towel. So I got that fun little kind of splatter effect going on the background. And then when those were dry, I die cut them with that stitched rectangle die. And then the small sentiments, I die cut with the smallest of the Simon sentiment labels wafer die. And I also sponged that peeled paint distress ink on top of it just to kind of bring the color to the similar color of the ink because the green leaf cardstock was a bit more, I guess I would call it a blue green than I would the peeled paint sort of green. So I did all that sponging, and then my card base is the Neenah Desert Storm cardstock that comes in a kit, and I cut that in half, and then I scored them both at 4 1/4. So these are regular A2 size cards. And then for both card bases, I lined them up on my stamp platform because I wanted to use this really big sentiment stamp that's in the Thanks and Leaves stamp set. So I got that lined up so that I can stamp that with the Distress Oxide peeled paint ink here. So I'm going to ink that up and then stamp that onto the inside of the card. And it says, "So grateful for everything you do and your support. But most of all, I'm thankful for the amazing person you are." I love these sentiments. So I was able to stamp both of those since I had it lined up my platform, got that stamped on the inside of both cards. And then to adhere my ink resist panels here, I used foam tape, completely covered the back of this with foam tape. I'm going to pop this onto each card. And then for the little sentiment, to finish it off so it'll say thank you is not enough, I used little Derice foam strips on the back of those little smaller sentiments, and I'm going to pop those onto both cards right under the thank you. And at first I wasn't sure where. I was like, just habit, usually, you know, I would put it more on the right, but I liked how it fit just kind of perfectly there right under the word thanks. So I adhered that. And then as a final bit of embellishment in the kit, there's these fun little bronze sequins, and they actually match. They're called bronze sequins, but the color is very, very similar to Simon's gold embossing powder. Like it was a perfect match. So I was very light-handed with these instead of adding like 100 like I usually do. I only added 3 to each card, and I'm just adhering them into place with little dabs of Simon's Craft Tacky Glue. Just using my crystal katana to kind of pick those up, put on a dab of glue, press those into place, and that's going to finish off my cards. So I will have links to my blog post. I'll have links to all the supplies used, the color challenge, everything. All of that will be linked directly below the video and in my blog post. You can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.